I hate having to make a video where I call one of my favorite characters in the game a really bad character, like gameplay-wise, but yeah, gameplay-wise, Halloween Alina is a very easy skip and you don't have to think more about this. However, there's still one aspect about her that maybe still convinces you to pull for her, and I'll get over that at the very end on why maybe you might still want to pull for her. But let's just lay it down. What does Halloween Alina actually do? So, Alina Grey, Marigold Dadaism, which by the way is an art form, Dadaism. Anyway, she is a flame attacker who focuses on area effect damage, meaning she attacks all enemies at the same time. That is basically the idea behind her. And more so than just attacking all enemies, she's also about damage over time ailments. And you might think, oh, this might mean that she should be played in a damage over time team, right? And that now maybe damage over time teams can deal good damage. But there's a lot of caveats attached to this, and maybe she's not actually what damage over time teams need, or maybe she's not actually the character that you would play in a damage over time team anyway, at least not with the current characters that we have. So let's just go down to the weeds and look at all the different things that she does. We're going to start out with maybe the most important part of her entire kit, which is her skill. So her skill deals damage to all enemies and then applies a debuff that makes them take 20% more flame damage. Sadly, only flame damage, which I don't know why this isn't supposed to be like damage over time stuff. Like, let's say, for example, it says increases targets damage over time damage taken. That would mean that this debuff would actually synergize with other damage over time characters. But it's just flame damage, which at least means it also applies to her like actual on-hit damage, like regular attack damage, like the damage from the skill itself or from her special. But it also means that this has nothing to do with damage over time. Let's put that out there first. So it's just a 20% damage, flame damage taken, which basically just means her own attacks and her own damage over time stuff. And then it applies a Phantom Trick buff to self. Now, what is Phantom Trick? Phantom Trick is her own very special buff. And what it does is the following. When at least one enemy is present, increases damage dealt by 10%, plus 10% for each additional enemy up to 50%. So somewhere from 1 to 5 enemies, you have either 10% damage bonus or 50% damage bonus, which is a decently high number and is probably the best part about her entire kit. It's only downhill from here. So then you also increase your own ongoing damage dealt by 20%. And once again, when it says ongoing damage, that just means damage over time ailments. They don't call them damage over time ailments, they call it ongoing damage. Okay, keep that in mind. So this is basically the idea first behind her skill. You hit every enemy, make them weak to fire damage, and then you also give yourself a buff that makes you do a lot more damage against more enemies. So already we know you're supposed to play her in an AoE scenario, because if you don't play her in an AoE scenario, your Phantom Trick buff is just not gonna give you much damage at all. Like, it's gonna give you barely anything. And she definitely wants that buff to be as high as possible, so of course you can do the most amount of damage possible. Now then we move on to her passive, and her passive says whenever an enemy takes damage over time, increase your own attack by 2%, up to 15 stacks, which means 30% attack, which is a pretty big attack percent buff. Let's not get ourselves, 30% is quite big. But keep in mind, if an enemy has multiple types of damage over time effects on it, and then that enemy's turn happens and they take like 4 different types of damage over time, you still only get 1 stack. Right? You still only get 1 stack from that. So different types do not count in more stacks, which I feel like it should have. That would have made it a much easier. But keep in mind that you want to play her in scenarios where you have 5 enemies on the enemy side. So if you use just her skill, by the way, when you use her skill, it already immediately applies a burn. We'll see why in a second. But when all the enemies are burning from just her skill, that means you're already getting 5 stacks if all the enemies take a turn, or if all of those burns would then get blown up by something that consumes damage over time ailments. So at least she herself, by being able to apply ailments to multiple characters, to multiple enemies, can at least fulfill this stack going up decently fast to some degree, but we'll see. Next up though, what the passive does is, it also says while Phantom Trick is applied to self, increases own ailment hit rate by 25%, meaning that if the enemy has a little bit of resistance to burn, I think it's like, if the enemy has like only 20% resistance to burn, you're still guaranteed to hit the turn, basically. You're actually still guaranteed to hit the burn. And then it says on ongoing damage dealt to enemy increases on action roll by 5%. And then it also says on only use of a basic attack or battle skill also burns the enemy for 20% of your attack damage for 1 turn. This is what I meant earlier, that you can apply burn yourself. And even though it says you have to have Phantom Trick applied to you, and then when you use your skill, then it burns enemies, the way it actually works is the skill hits enemies, applies the debuff of enemies taking more damage, then you apply Phantom Trick to yourself, and then it still applies the burn afterwards. So you need to keep in mind, like, this is the order of operation, that it applies Phantom Trick to you and then immediately also applies the burn to the enemy with the very same hit that applied Phantom Trick to you. So even if the battle has just started and you just use your skill, you're already applying burn to every single enemy. And this is why it actually means that, yes, she can stack the attack percent buff on herself decently fast, because she already applies burn to every single enemy immediately. And because she has 25% ailment hit rate as well, that means if the enemy has, like I said, up to 20% hit rate, ailment resistance to burn, that means you're still guaranteed. And if the enemy has more resistance to that, let's say it has like 40 or 60 or even 80%, you're still a bit more likely than usual to hit your burn compared to another character with burn, for example. Of course, if the enemy has 100% resistance to burn, no amount of ailment hit rate will save you. If the enemy has 100%, you will never be able to hit the burn, no matter how much ailment hit rate you have. Okay, so far it doesn't seem too bad, right? You attack all enemies, you burn them all, you gain a buff, you make the enemy take more damage. But we start seeing some cracks, because the burn is 20% damage, like 20% of your attack damage for 1 turn. That is very, very low. Like, insanely low. If you want to know how low that really is, we can compare it to someone else who does an AoE ailment, like to all enemies, that then deals damage. And what you have to look at is, for example, Swimsuit Sayaka. Swimsuit Sayaka deals 150% damage to all enemies, which, by the way, is already more than Alina, because she does 135% damage to all enemies. And then on top of that, Swimsuit Sayaka applies a vortex. Now, how much does that vortex do? Another 100%, meaning that Swimsuit Sayaka actually does 250% total damage to all enemies. 150% of that is the hit itself, and another 100% in a damage over time ailment, because vortex counts as damage over time ailment, which is insane compared to Alina, who does 135% on the hit and then 20% on the burn, which is a total of 155%. Not a lot. In fact, that is very low. That is very, very low. But it's okay, because attackers have a lot higher base attack, right? The base attack of attackers is way, way higher. So the percentages for, even though they're not that much higher, in fact, they're not higher at all, they're actually lower for Alina. That means that because of the higher base attack, she's still gonna hit harder than Swimsuit Sayaka, right? Usually you would be right, except Alina has really low base attack, like really, really low base attack. In fact, she almost has as low base attack as Swimsuit Sayaka. Swimsuit Sayaka is not an attacker, she's a debuffer. Debuffers are not supposed to have as high base attack as attackers. But Alina's base attack is so low, she almost has as low base attack as a debuffer. That's really bad. Because now not only are her percentages worse than Swimsuit Sayaka, her base attack isn't even much higher at all. So if you're now looking at this and thinking to yourself, wait a minute, if I want to do AoE damage, and specifically AoE damage over time damage, isn't Swimsuit Sayaka already better with just her skill? The answer is yes. The answer is actually yes. You're already looking at a character that, with both her skill and her passive, is already worse than another character we already have. Fantastic. Amazing. Well, maybe. The special attack is so good that it changes everything. So, let's look at the special attack. The special attack for Halloween Alina is the following. Deals 260% flame damage to all enemies. By the way, I'm looking at special level 10 for this. With 100% chance to burn 40% for 1 turn. And then if you have Phantom Trick enabled, which you should hopefully have at all times, because your skill gives it to you for 2 turns, and hopefully you're using skill every turn when the enemy is broken. Although if the enemy was just broken and you haven't used your skill yet, and you have your special ready, you need to actually wait for your turn to use special at maximum MP, so you waste all that MP, just to get the Phantom Trick buff, and then you can use your special. That sucks. But if you use the special with Phantom Trick active, it then consumes all remaining turns of ongoing damage effects on the target and immediately deals the total damage, which is what I call dot explosion. So it explodes all the dots on the enemy, immediately deals all that damage. So for example, the way this actually works with her special, because her special also applies a burn, as I just read out, it actually deals the damage of the hit first, then it applies the burn, and then the burn immediately gets exploded. So even if the enemy doesn't even have a burn on it, if you have Phantom Trick active and you use your special, it does hit, burn, immediately explodes the burn. So you actually see two numbers pop up. The first number is the one from the actual hit, and the second number that pops up is the number from the burn that you just applied that immediately gets exploded. Awesome. So you could actually argue that her special doesn't do 260% to all enemies and then 40% as well, but rather does like, you could combine them and say, oh, it just does 300% damage to all enemies. You could just combine it like that and it works. Now, you probably also already have a burn on the enemy because you probably used your skill before this or just attacked the enemy before this with your buff active, in which case the enemy would also have your regular burn on it. Not always, but probably has your regular burn on it. And then you can add that as well, because the regular burn does 20%. If you combine all that together, you could say, oh, the special does about 320% damage then if you combine that, because it gets exploded by the special. Now, 320% damage to all enemies sounds kind of interesting. Like that number has something to it. Because it turns out that's the exact same number as other attackers have on their AoE specials, right? For example, Oriko has 320% damage to all enemies. Sakurako, 320% damage to all enemies. Holy Mami has 260%, but she then deals 10 extra hits of 26% damage to all enemies, right? So, okay. But Swimsuit Sayaka is still there. Swimsuit Sayaka has 300% damage to all enemies. That's worse as the hit. And then it also applies Vortex to all enemies, which is another 160%. So Swimsuit Sayaka actually has 460% against the 320% of all the other attackers. Oh, Swimsuit Sayaka is just better. Swimsuit Sayaka is actually just better. Awesome. Amazing. And it's not even just that. All these other attackers that I just read out, like for example Sakurako and Oriko, that have also 320% damage on their specials. Sakurako gets an automatic follow-up attack on her special, which is also extra buff because her special buffs her follow-up attacks, and she gets an automatic follow-up attack that does another 60% damage plus buffs. So it's actually 380% and more, and because she has really high own crit rate, it's also going to crit. And it's buffed, so it ends up being like 600% or something with the crit in there and with the buffs in there. So 600% plus the 320% that we see from Halloween Alina. And Oriko also gets bonus hits because it says when fewer than 5 enemies are present, she deals 10% of special attack damage as light attack damage bonus. So if the enemy has less than 5, she also gets bonus hits, which does even more damage. And Oriko is not even a good character in most cases, so even she seems to do more damage. But hold up, that's not all of it, because Halloween Alina, she gains more stuff from this. Let's just read out the rest of the special itself, by the way. And if you use a special and you have exploded the dots with Phantom Trick, then you also apply another burn for 40% for 2 turns, so just to make sure that there's another burn on the enemy. And then you also increase your speed by 10%. The speed by 10% for 2 turns doesn't matter, might as well not be here, it's entirely pointless. Still better than nothing, hey? But yeah, the burn is just to make sure there's another burn on the target because you just exploded the one that you got from your own special. Awesome. But like I said, so Halloween Alina also gets some bonuses, right? Like all these other characters that I just read off, they got some bonuses, they got more hits, they got some special stuff in there, right? Like Sakurako, who's basically guaranteed to crit, so she does way more damage just through her crits and with her guaranteed follow-up attack. But Halloween Alina, she buffs her own damage over time, right? Her Phantom Trick gives her 20% increases own damage dealt, right? So that helps her out. And I can tell you right now, her EX Crystallis also increases her own ongoing damage dealt by 20%. And it also gives her up to 10% speed whenever ongoing damage is dealt. Which, by the way, this EX Crystallis is really bad and you're not going to use it. So it's terrible. But imagine you did use it. Then you would have 40% damage increase to ongoing damage. 40%. Now this only applies to your own ongoing damage, which means it only applies to the 40% burn from her special and the 20% burn from her passive. So you have a 60% burn that then gets buffed by like 20%. So if we do the maths very quick, let me pull up my calculator and say, okay, we have 60 times 1.2. Then with just a 20%, that would be a 72%. And if we have both the EX and her passive, that would mean the 60% gets buffed by 1.4, which is 84%. So her special doesn't just do 320%, it does 344%, compared to Swimsuit Sayaka, who does like 460%, and Sakurako, who does like 380% plus crits plus follow-up attack buffs. It's not even close. It's not even close. And keep in mind, it's actually way worse than that, because here's the next part. She can't crit with dots, so the burn that gets exploded, like her own burns that get exploded, and the other damage over time elements that are on an enemy when they get exploded, they can't crit. So if you play her on a crit team, or just generally, let's say you just have crit, or you just get lucky and have a crit, since the elements can't crit, you're also doing less damage than all these other attackers that can crit. So not only are her percentages fucking terrible, like some of the worst percentages we've ever seen, they also can't crit. Like some of those percentages can't crit. Is this a joke? Is this character a joke? What? So even with the buffs to her own ongoing damage, because her percentages are so low, and it's only one turn, so consumes all turns of ongoing damage. It's just one turn. It's just one turn anyway, like, what's the point? She can't even get more turns on her through her ascensions, like, what's the fucking point? And yeah, Swimsuit Sayaka just does everything she does, but better. Because Swimsuit Sayaka also makes the enemy take more damage, because Swimsuit Sayaka reduces enemy defense by 30%, which, guess what, is way better than her skill. Reducing and making enemies take 20% more flame damage. Just flame damage. Oh boy. So if you have like an A0 Swimsuit Sayaka, there's already no reason to roll for Halloween Alina. Unless, of course, you want a flame character to be worse, like to do the same but way worse. Awesome. Fantastic. But here's what some people might be saying. But the dot explosion is really good, right? For high number... Other characters can explode dots as well. We have Hana who can do it, we have Nemu who can do it. And keep in mind, you're exploding other characters' dots, which means that the actual scaling for those dots comes from other characters. Like if she explodes Nemu's dots, for example, then only Nemu's like damage buffs and attack values, only those actually count for those dot explosions. So she buffing herself, she having hopefully a lot of attack herself with maybe the attack percent bonuses from her passive, the damage bonus from her skill, none of that matters if you're blowing up other people's dots. So even if those do a lot of damage, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Like let's say, for example, you have a Halloween mummy apply a really powerful curse to the enemy. It doesn't matter if your Nemu blows that up. It doesn't, or if it is your Halloween Alina that blows that up. It doesn't matter. They're just making other people do that damage. I'm asking, what does Halloween Alina do? Like, don't ask yourself, what can the attacker do for other characters? Because the answer is something that other characters can already do. So it's not even special. Ask what that special character can do that other characters can't. And if you're asking that question, like, what does Halloween Alina herself actually bring to the table? The answer is her support ability. Because her support ability is actually one of the best in the game. So far, I've basically dunked on Halloween Alina really, really hard and called her... I said before that maybe she's only the second worst attacker in the game next to Holy Mummy. Holy Mummy might actually still be better than Halloween Alina, because Halloween Alina, I don't even see anything that can redeem her. However, she has one thing that Holy Mummy doesn't. Holy Mummy has a really bad... not really bad, but not that great of a support ability. But Halloween Alina has a really, really good support ability. In fact, like I said, it might actually be the best attacker support ability in the game. So what does it do? Equipped to attacker, increases attack by 15% and damage up by 10%, which is a grand total of 25% damage buff, except it's a bit more, because these two effects are multiplicative with each other. And then on top of that, it also says, on enemy break, increases damage dealt when targeting element weakness by 10% for 2 turns. 2 turns is usually long enough for the burst, hopefully, when the enemy gets broken. Which means that, yeah, numbers-wise, just numbers-wise, this is actually way better than almost every single other attacker, maybe even better than every single other attacker passive out there. The only one that, in my opinion, comes close is, well, on one hand, you have Oriko specifically on AoE targets, but only on AoE targets, and then if you have multiple characters on the enemy side, let's say 4 of them die, there's only one target left, then suddenly her passive, like her support passive, doesn't do as much anymore. In fact, it doesn't do that much at all. But the other one I was thinking of is Sakurako, because Sakurako has the passive that increases crit rate and crit damage, and that was really good. Basically, every single team that plays with a Tsuruno, for example, or just any team that plays a crit-focused team, your attacker is going to use Sakurako's support ability. But if you're not playing a crit team, let's say you're playing a team where you don't have Tsuruno or some other crit buffer on the team, then Halloween Alina might be the #1 choice for support Kyoko for your attacker. And that is the one thing that might still make you want to roll for Halloween Alina. The fact that her support ability is really fucking good. Now keep in mind that because her base attack is really low and you're probably not going to get ascensions for her, that means that the actual base attack that she gives through her support Kyoko to whoever you equip it to is very low. And that might actually counteract the bonus from her support Kyoko, which is really bad. But it's probably still really good to use her support Kyoko if you if you don't have like specifically a crit team with Sakurako as you support Kyoko. So yeah, is there something else that can redeem her? We haven't talked about her Ascension 2 yet. So her Ascension 2 adds 1 turn to the duration of Phantom Trick, which is not going to help you like at all. And it also says while Phantom Trick is applied, it increases damage up by 20%, which is good. 20% damage dealt is good, but we need a lot more than just 20% damage dealt while you have this buff active. That is not enough. That is not enough to make this character suddenly not terrible. So yeah, that is it for Halloween Alina. There's one other thing though I want to mention, and this is the weird part about. But first off, yeah, the weird part about the team building. But first off, I wanted to have some footage going on in the background. I don't even know which footage I'm going to use for this, because the point is, I tried to find footage or create footage even where I can show off what she can do. In order to create that footage, maybe I was trying to find a boss where you can use her. Like find a boss where you can set up with a lot of damage over time ailments and then explode them all and then see big numbers or whatever. But I went through basically every single boss in Nightmare and Chaos and in Tower and everywhere, and I could not find a single boss where I can make her look good. So I think the footage in the background is just me showing her off on stream when I rolled for her. Like when I rolled for her on stream, I showed her off in 1 or 2 battles. That's probably when I showed her in the background. But I tried to create footage that makes her look good, and I couldn't. I couldn't create anything because I couldn't find a boss or a team setup that would actually make her look good. It was terrible. And here's the main reason why. So the weird part about team building with Halloween Alina is the following. You don't actually want to play her in a damage over time team. Because here's the question that I've been asking myself all this time. What does she personally gain from having other damage over time damage dealers next to her? The answer is the following. Her dot explosions are a little higher. But like I said, other characters can create dot explosions as well, and they're probably going to release more characters in the future that can do dot explosions, and those explosions deal the damage of other characters. It's not Alina's damage in this case. So that's not even something that is specific to her, right? So that's not something that she specifically gains as like a special thing by having other damage over time characters next to her, right? So what does she gain? What does she gain from being on a damage over time team? She must gain something. Well, whenever an enemy takes ongoing damage through her passive, she gains a stacking attack % buff. Except she can satisfy that herself. If she like attacks the enemy with her skill, she applies burn to all enemies. And then by using burn like once or 2 more times, or even exploding it with her special ones, she can stack that herself really, really fast. In fact, she can stack that passive faster than other characters could do for her. Because we don't have anyone else who can apply AoE ailments this easily, right? She is the best character for stacking her own passive. And if you have an enemy have multiple damage over time ailments, let's say you have a Nemu, for example, as well, who also uses her poison on enemy, that doesn't give you more stacks, because it only counts for 1 ailment per tick. And so if you have multiple ailments on the same tick, it doesn't count. You still get only 1 stack. So she doesn't even gain stacks any faster. So once again, I'm asking, what does she gain from being on a damage over time team? Well, whenever an enemy takes damage over time, she also advances her own action order by 5%. Except it's once again just once per tick, so if the enemy has multiple ailments on it, doesn't do anything. So once again, I'm asking, what does she gain from being on a damage over time team? Because everything that I'm seeing so far are either things that other characters can do on their own anyway, so it doesn't even benefit Alina, or things that she can satisfy herself, right? Alina is perfect at satisfying. I should not say it like that. Alina's bonuses, everything that Alina gains from the enemy taking damage over time, is things that she can best do herself. She doesn't need other characters to do that. And in fact, other characters don't even increase the amount of like bonus buffs that she gains or anything like that. So this is the weird part about Halloween Alina. In most cases, she doesn't gain anything from being on a damage over time team, so don't put her on a damage over time team. Yeah, you don't actually play on a damage over time team. That's the takeaway. You don't play her on a dot team. What the fuck is happening? There is one case though where theoretically you could play on damage over time team, which is, let's say for example, there is a score attack where you want to deal as much damage as possible, and it's 5 enemies. And all of those 5 enemies take a lot of damage from damage over time because maybe they have a passive where they take a lot of damage from damage over time. And then you have Halloween Alina, and let's say you have other characters that can apply ailment to all enemies, and then you would have every single enemy on the enemy side have like 3 or 4 damage over time effects on them, right? And then they're all broken and they all have a high damage multiplier from break. And let's say they are also resistant to crit, because they have to be resistant to crit, otherwise crit is better. So let's say they're also resistant to crit and they have a lot of dots on them and they take bonus damage from dots. Then, and only then, could you play her on a full dot team, and then the explosion from her own special would hit really high numbers on every single enemy combined for the score attack maximum damage score. That is the only situation. Even if it was the exact same situation, but the enemy still took the normal amount of damage from crits, Momoko would probably still be better. Even just against 3 targets. Even if there are 5 targets on the enemy side. Like, this is how hard everything is stacked against dot teams. The numbers just aren't there. And even then, this is just for the damage high score. If we're talking about actual regular damage that you deal per break phase, like let's say you break the damage, you break the enemy, and you're thinking about how much damage can I do before the enemy gets out of break. If you're asking yourself that question, even damage over time teams with Halloween Alina, they do fucking nothing, because you're wasting so many character slots. Like a character slot on Nemu on a Halloween Alina team. What the fuck is that Nemu doing? She's applying a poison, and other than that, she can just go home, I guess? Are you spending an entire character slot on like 20% defense reduction and a poison? That's an entire character slot. Versus a character slot like using that same character slot on a Tsuruno, for example, who would give you a fuck ton of crit rate and crit damage and attack. It would make your Homoda hit for not 2 million damage, but like 5 million damage on a crit. That's what we're talking about. But no, you can have a Nemu instead, who does a poison and 20% defense down. Are we being serious here? Like, what? Let's say you put a Hana on there. Look, what does Hana do? Like a small curse. That's fantastic. Let's say you put a Halloween Mummy there. And this is the insane part. She doesn't want Halloween Alina on the team if you're playing her correctly. Why? Here's why. So, let's say, for example, you have an AoE scenario with 5 enemies. And this is the scenario that you want for Halloween Alina. You want a 5 enemy scenario for Halloween Alina, but because you want a 5 enemy scenario, you now run into the problem that Halloween Mummy is single target. Entirely single target. So you would have to spend a fuck ton of skill points and a fuck ton of turns and multiple specials to spread out the damage reduction, the damage increase and the damage over time effects on multiple enemies. And by the time you're actually able to spread out all of your stuff across all enemies, the debuffs and the curses are probably already running out, so you can't even do it correctly. But maybe you're saying, oh, but what if maybe the center enemy, like you have one enemy that is like the focus enemy, and you want the focus enemy to take as much damage as possible, so you're only going to apply the debuffs and the curse to the single center enemy. But if there's a single center enemy that's the focus target, and it's flame weak, you play Momoko instead. You play Momoko instead, and you don't play Halloween Alina. So even in this scenario that I've just constructed, you don't play Halloween Alina together with Halloween Mummy. Because either it's AoE scenario and Halloween Mummy sucks, or it's a mixed scenario where it's like multiple enemies but only one central enemy, then you play Momoko with Halloween Alina Mummy. So it's Halloween Mummy and Momoko. Or it's single target, In which case you play Halloween Mommy, but you don't play Halloween Alina. And you play Momoko. What? So there's no scenario actually where you would play both of them at once. Unless, like I said, maybe this scenario made up about the score attack, because the current score attack isn't even multi-target. So the current score attack that's supposed to be for damage over time isn't even that. And the current link rate, yeah, link rate doesn't matter for damage records. Like, your damage record doesn't matter. You just need to kill the boss. And when it comes to just killing the boss, it's actually a lot more important to have multiple strong hits. And for multiple strong hits, you go crit rate and crit damage. That's way better than damage over time. Oh boy. You can't make it good. So generally, like I said, like I've just explained, you don't play Halloween Alina on a damage over time team because she already gives everything to herself, and she doesn't actually benefit from damage over time characters being on the team. But that just means that she doesn't do anything special. She's just a terrible attacker. The other way around, let's say you're playing a damage over time team and you're thinking about, can I include Halloween Alina on this already existing damage over time team? Well, then you need to answer the question, what does Halloween Alina bring to the other dot characters? Well, she explodes dots on all enemies to be able to do all the damage at once. That's good. That's about it. She makes the enemies take more flame damage, but that's only increasing the damage for burn and her own damage. But all the other characters that might do curse or poison or wound, their damage doesn't get increased by that. And Halloween Alina only buffs her own damage over time for all of her various effects. So she doesn't actually do much to help other damage over time characters. So other damage over time characters don't gain anything from Halloween Alina, and Halloween Alina doesn't gain anything from damage over time characters. She's a useless character. She's an actually useless character. And it doesn't work. Like, if a mystical, magical damage over time team were to exist in the future, Halloween Alina is probably not going to be part of that. And if she is, she'll only be there for like the damage score record, but not for actual like damage per turn reasons. Yeah, she's cooked in a bad way. She overcooked. Well, is there anything positive? Like I said, her support Kyoko is really good. Like, her support ability is actually really, really good. Now, keep in mind, by the way, she's also limited, which means you're not going to be able to get bonus ascensions for her. Because at least if she wasn't limited, maybe you just randomly get a bunch of ascensions for her, and let's say you don't have ascensions for other characters, like let's say you don't have ascensions for your Momoko, but you have a whole bunch of ascensions for your Halloween Alina, then maybe in AoE scenarios or cleave scenarios you can maybe use her, but that's not even the case. Your Momoko is going to have way higher ascensions, and she's also just better. Like, Momoko is not even one of the best attackers out there, but Momoko still blows Halloween Alina out the fucking water. It's not even close. It's not even close. My Momoko crits for like 10 million damage or something. My Halloween Alina does like, she struggles to get a single million. That's a big oof. That's a very big oof. So yeah, that's it for Halloween Alina. Oh, I haven't mentioned what crystals you want to use for her. Not her EX, because her EX is terrible. She doesn't even have a good EX. Like, this could have maybe saved, but she doesn't even have a good EX. Yeah, you can use attack percent, weakness percent, and then maybe flame damage percent. And it gets even worse, by the way, if you're thinking, oh, what about the damage over time Crystallis? The damage over time Crystallis buffs damage over time by 20%. 20%, by the way. Which you can compare to, for example, flame damage 20%. Let's say, for example, you're thinking about giving her the ongoing damage 20% versus the flame 20%. The thing is, the ongoing damage dealt is only for ongoing damage, but the flame damage is for all damage. And they're not multiplicative, they're additive with each other. Which means, do you want 20% just for a very low amount of damage over time? Or do you want 20% for all her damage? Which includes damage over time. Because that's the weird part. Flame attack also includes burn damage. So the ongoing damage dealt Crystallis is also fucking useless on every single damage over time character. Let's say, for example, Nemu, you want Nemu to be a damage over time character. You give her fucking forest damage. Give her forest damage. Because that includes both poison and regular damage. It's both forest. Everything is cooked about damage over time. Damage over time is not a thing. You also need to keep in mind Every single damage over time character in the game right now doesn't actually care about doing damage with damage over time. They all care about activating special effects or countering boss gimmicks, right? The reason you're playing damage over time right now, like Halloween Mummy, is because there's a boss that says when it takes damage over time, it gets weakened. That's the main reason you're doing it. If that boss didn't say that, you wouldn't be playing it. And conversely, Halloween Mummy doesn't really care too much about actually dealing damage with curse. She just wants there to be a curse on the enemy so she can trigger bonus effects, right? Mifuyu, for example. Mifuyu gains bonus crit rate against cursed target. The fact that curse deals damage is secondary, and it doesn't really matter. The curse could do 0 damage, wouldn't change anything. You just want there to be a curse on the enemy so you trigger the bonus effect, and at the same time, the boss might have a special mechanic that gets weakened when it has an ailment. Damage over time as damage dealing is not a thing, and it's probably not gonna happen for a very, very long time. Definitely not with these 2 characters. So yeah, she's cooked. Halloween Alina, probably skip her unless you want specifically her support Kyoku, which is pretty darn good. Might be the best out there, but like I said, because she's not gonna have Ascensions and she has low base attack, the actual base attack that she gives through a Crystalist equip, through a support ability equip is gonna be really, really low, which might not even make it worth it. That was it. I'm sorry for a bit of longer rant, but I need to get you across why damage over time and specifically how Halloween Alina is fucking cooked in a bad way. It's totally overcooked. So yeah, thank you everyone for watching. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, become a member today. Shout outs to my members, Chai Bean, Rip van Winkel, and Simple Tour. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time.